Welcome to week 4 of your Principles of Management course. I am going to talk to you about the global context in which managers manage today. And I think the best thing to do is to head up there and show you the presentation I intend sharing with you. You can freeze that whenever you want because it enables you to take notes from the script that I use to run this presentation. So give that a go. First things first, kind of objectives that any course that intends grooming you with respect to an introduction of what management is about and how it works is something which is going to address these sorts of objectives. And what we're saying is because you've watched the other 3 um, weeks of lessons, you know that managers manage in a context in which they are trying to direct resources to achieve certain outcomes. Those outcomes, in a simple fashion, can be described as the pursuit of production or output, but performed so effectively and efficiently. In order to do that, they coordinate resources, but we're now cognizant or aware of the fact that those people and the methods that are used to pursue productive output are based in a system, and that system is one which is complexioned by things like culture, and we must take into account that it's not just culture which impacts on the organization which a manager undertakes, but also the customers, the suppliers, the competitors that occupy that same trading space. So if we are to distinguish those trading spaces, we do so on the basis of this dimension. We talk about there being a task or near environment, and we talk about there being a remote or broad or general environment. If you're worried about it, don't be, because I'll explain it in detail later. We want you to know what the forces are that occupy those spaces, forces that impose themselves in a company on a global or perhaps even just a national level, as well as forces that impose themselves on the immediate competitive environment, the task environment of the firm. That is not where it ends, because I need to add a couple more to this. This is not a course in international business, but we're going to give you an idea of what trading in a global environment is like. And the environment we work within has always been global. It's just that it's very global now compared to what it might ever have been in the past. And then finally, I want you to be aware, please, of the fact that cultures differ across the world, and consequently, the nature of management practice is likely to differ across the world for 2 reasons. And the reasons are that managers are members of a culture themselves. And the second reason is that if a manager is unaware of the culture in a region into which the manager wishes to introduce business, that manager is going to get hurt real bad. And that's not what we want for any enterprise or any enterprise manager. So here's a quick kind of summary. You need to know what's going on around you if you're managing anything. And knowing what's going on around you is something which we then divide into 2 subsets. There are opportunities and there are threats, nicely color coded. Green for opportunities, red for threats. We're saying threats are bad. You try to avoid them, and opportunities are great. You try to capitalize or exploit them, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be successful. So one is ever present of the risk of threats overtaking the business. And for any manager, the goal must be to try and develop a set of strengths which are going to be able to overcome threats as they present themselves. So some organizations operate across the world, and we just refer to them as global organizations because that's the simple way to do it. famous brands, because we all eat king steers, operates in 18 countries across the world. Nando's operates in 20 countries. And that's a map in front of you. The Nando's occupies all of those spaces. Now, I want you to think about this map of Nando's restaurants. Basically, they're not selling any in South America, and I think that has to do with the fact that Brazil over here, for example, which is Portuguese speaking, is not going to be the kind of space where a Portuguese restaurant would think about setting a business, because quite conceivably the competition is going to be a little great. But they have stores in the United States of America and in Canada. They have them in Europe and the Middle East and even Australasia, with New Zealand and Australia over here. Think about what you see on that map in front of you. Do you recognize that if a manager, one day perhaps you, working here in South Africa, is trying to manage a Nando's restaurant or franchises here in the Middle East, they would have to take account of the conditions in the Middle East, not so? So at the time of this broadcast, we know that there has been war in the Middle East for almost a year. And that obviously is going to impact on the stability and the security and the spending that consumers undertake in that region. And those sensations are going to be different compared to what they might be over here in the Northern Americas. Again, they'd be different compared to what they might be in Europe. And we know that there is we just had elections in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, and that Keir Starmer is now Prime Minister. And we know that they've had riots, and we know that those riots are related to the broader sensations of socio-cultural division across the world. The point is that if one is managing in a global environment, one has to pay attention to not only the opportunities that might exist, but also the threats which present themselves. A goal is always onwards, always upwards, but threats can remove that prospect, and those threats are typically beyond the control of any enterprise. One can't control one's external environment because it is external to one. So we're looking here of the decline in fortunes, of the energy availability factor, the EAF, over the 20 years from the turn of the century to the year 2020. The availability of good fuel is a major issue for every power utility company that burns coal. And as that fuel, the good fuel, becomes harder and harder to get hold of, the energy availability factor starts to decline. And we know that the one thing we can't really afford in South Africa is a decline in energy, because that results in a decline in the fortunes of companies which require electricity to operate. So this is the kind of illustration that you will find in a textbook. And I think I need to build up the 3 layers that you see there in yellow, green, and blue, because it isn't necessarily clear. So I'm going to draw this for you. As I draw it, you'll see it emerge. I'm going to start in the middle with the organization. And putting that on screen in front of you means that I can say the things that are in proximity, the things that are near to this business, are part and parcel of what we refer to as the company or business's task environment. Okay? I've written it there as the immediate context within which the firm operates. If you are operating a business from a shopping mall, let's say a Bridge City, then the immediate environment is going to impact upon the performance of your business. In other words, we're saying what else operates in that greater KwaMashu Inanda strip. Let me build up the layers for you, because now I can introduce what I've written in green as the wider context. So from the organization to the immediate environment, and then that which is more remote. Remember, I used that word, the more remote environment. But we've now got to say, what does that actually mean? So I'm going to try and fill that in for you. First up, saying here that the task environment is the day-to-day stuff. You can pause this and write those things down, but I just want to move on and contrast the task environment with the general environment, which has a fancy description, and I expect that you're going to have to pause the video again and write those things down. But we're saying here that what you see on the screen in front of you is generally described by most people in business management as PEST forces. PEST for political, economic, social, and technological. The thing is that while the competition that is carried out by a business which is next door to yours is relatively easy to see, and therefore you can try and account for it and do different things. It's more difficult, as I've written there, to identify and respond to remote issues than it is to respond to immediate environment issues. So if I just step backwards for a couple of years, we're saying that every bit of disharmony that I've written on the screen there are things which, this side of 2020, have impacted businesses quite adversely, with no ability really to respond other than reactively to those incidents. So then we saw an invasion by Russia of the Ukraine, and when Russia invaded Ukraine, what that did immediately was just reduce the flow of gas to Western Europe. And Western Europe uses the gas to heat its homes. And as that breadbasket, it's known as the breadbasket of Europe, it has been known as the breadbasket of the world. As the breadbasket of the world stopped producing the kind of maize crops and wheat crops which allowed us to feed the world, that caused global shortages. It's a big problem. The task environment specifically, and you can see over here that I'm going to show you 6 different things. These slides are a summary of textbook type material, and drawn for the greatest part from your particular prescribed textbook. If you are UKZN students watching this video, we're saying here that suppliers provide the stuff that you need to make a business work. And we now say, okay, so where do you find these suppliers? Because does one find them locally, or does one source one's goods, one's raw materials, or the goods that one wants to sell, does one source them somewhere else? For ourselves, we talk about overseas. Well, what is overseas? Is Germany overseas? Yes, it is. One takes a ship and puts a container on it and brings the product to us on the basis of importing. If one sells to America, how does one sell to America? You put it in a container and you put it onto the back of a ship and you cart it off to America, and you offload and put it into your distribution outlets there. This importing and exporting business, we tend to import quite a bit of machinery and mineral product, and we also import vehicles and aircraft and chemicals. And what I show you here are our main trading partners. About a fifth, 20%, is import and export with China. But Germany and the United States and India represent trading partners as well. It doesn't stop there. The task environment also includes distributors. In other words, if you are trying to sell in a business, who do you sell to? And where will they obtain your product from? How are they able to access it? And who will they sell it to? Because you see, this is an important point. It isn't guaranteed that because you have stuff that you want to sell, that you will be able to sell it. And if you are trying to reach a particular audience of people that you want your product to be used by, if there's an in-betweener, a fast-moving consumer goods outlet like ShopRite or Checkers, or Pick and Pay or Boxer, they can limit your access to those customers by making it difficult for you to get to the customers through them, by introducing painful measures for you to have to address, such as charging you trade discounts on the value of the goods that you're trying to sell to customers via Checkers, for example. We also have to note these customers are unique. What we're trying to do is find out for every single individual, because we are all unique individuals, what individuals like and what they prepare to buy, what they need. That's difficult enough, but it's made more complex by the fact that you've now got competitors, and those competitors are trying to reach exactly the same customers as you. Now, if they do a better job of attracting those customers, then that's going to give you a bit of a problem. In fact, it's going to give you a big problem. So we talk about that as competitive rivalry, and any study in management then expands upon this notion of competitive rivalry and explores it and tries to model it so that you can develop an understanding of it. We talk then of barriers to entry. So getting into a particular market space might be made difficult because there are barriers to entry, like there being, for example, really tough distributors. And we're saying that two things typically create barriers to entry. If you're a business and you don't want competition, then you try and produce a lot of something, because those economies of scale, and you can go and do a Google search for that, are going to preclude anyone else getting into your market space, because if they can't achieve the same economies of scale, then they can't really compete with you. And then also brand loyalty over here, because brand loyalty suggests that if you can develop amongst customers a loyalty to the brand, then they are not going to support other brands. In other words, it's like saying that someone who has bought a VW Polo is going to want to remain in the VW stable. They'll buy VWs for the rest of their life. And for many people, that is in fact the case, as it is with BMW and Toyota, for example. So these barriers to entry, you can pause this and make a note. We're saying economies of scale, brand loyalty, okay? And also, I'd like to point out government regulations. So if you were a chicken producer in South Africa, you would, for example, want to limit the amount of competition that there would be from cheap chicken imports. And cheap chicken imports arrive as exports from countries that have economies of scale or favorable factor input costs, for example. And then you would turn to your government and say, dear government, please can you introduce some kind of restriction on the ability that exporters in other countries have to sell to South Africa, because we're really finding the competition quite fierce. Thanks very much. We'll have to talk about that a little more. And I think that with 24 minutes of video over here, that's probably enough for now. And we'll have to cease and come back with a second part. I'll see you soon.